Should we be independent? And independent electeds, including the state treasurer, insurance commissioner, superintendent, and a number of state senators and representatives. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. And with that, I'd like to introduce Governor Bob Ferguson.
Thank you, Brianna. And thank you all for being here. We so appreciate it. And to those who joined me on short notice to be here, Speaker Jenkins, thank you so much for taking time to be here as well. But we appreciate, we won't introduce everybody for obvious reasons, but just really deeply appreciate everybody taking time from their busy schedules to be here today. So let me start by saying that I recently received a letter from U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi. I think you all have a copy of that. It purports to notify me that Washington State, and these are her words now, has been identified as a so-called sanctuary jurisdiction. That's her line. By the way, on grounds that her letter makes no effort whatsoever to explain. She refers to unidentified policies and practices within Washington State that she asserts violate federal law, once again, without any explanation whatsoever. The letter goes on to invoke federal obstruction, conspiracy, and harboring statutes that carry criminal penalties with prison time. Bondi even threatens that state officials, including some of the folks who joined me today, by the way, just so we're clear, even threatens that state officials, and I'm quoting now from her letter, operating under the color of the law, using their official position to obstruct federal immigration enforcement efforts and facilitating or inducing illegal immigration may be subject to criminal charges. That is breathtaking. And a letter like this cannot be normalized. Let me be very clear. Washington State will not be bullied or intimidated by threats and legally baseless accusations. In the America that I love, have taught my children to revere, we resolve our differences peacefully through public discourse and, if necessary, through the courts, not by threatening political opponents with imprisonment. Pam Bondi takes a very different approach. Her letter threatens me, police officers, state troopers, sheriffs, judges, and other officials with prison time. Why? Because our state legislature passed a bipartisan law that appropriately and lawfully limits the diversion of state and local resources to federal immigration enforcement. By threatening criminal prosecutions of state officials, this letter embarrasses and disgraces the office of the United States Attorney General. Washington State is proud to be a welcoming community that values immigrants and refugees' contributions to our economy and our cultural fabric. We do so while accounting for and complying with applicable federal law. If Pam Bondi really believed Washington State is in conflict with controlling federal law, she would make some effort to explain that. She did not because she cannot. In 2017, I was the first state attorney general to challenge President Donald Trump's efforts to trample our Constitution in court, and I was the first attorney general to defeat him. Along with the excellent team in the Office of the Attorney General, we went on to defeat the first Trump administration 55 times in court. We were unsuccessful in just 3 cases. Given that history, I can assure you I am prepared to defend Washington from any litigation the Trump administration wishes to pursue. If they choose to challenge me and my state, we will defeat them and seek all appropriate costs and fees. Pam Bondi seems to believe that cavalierly citing criminal statutes and personally threatening me, a democratically elected governor, will result in compromising the values of my state. That is not going to happen. Pam Bondi seems to think and seeks to have Washington State bend the knee to a Trump administration that day by day drags us closer to authoritarianism. That's not going to happen either. I am not intimidated by Pam Bondi or the president. Nobody standing behind me is intimidated by Pam Bondi or the president. We will defend our democracy, the rule of law, and the people of our state. Now, while Attorney General Pam Bondi's letter references no state laws, I suspect she's referring to the Keep Washington Working Act. The prime sponsor of that important law that was adopted by the state legislature in a bipartisan fashion is State Senator Lisa Wellman. We have her joining us today. We're proud to have her. She'll be saying a few words. She'll be followed by State Representative Julio Cortez, and then followed by Malou Chavez, Executive Director of the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, and then we're happy to answer any questions that folks have. So thank you again for being here, and it's my honor to introduce State Senator Lisa Wellman. Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you. I want to thank the governor and former Attorney General, who has from the very beginning been such a support through the 3-year process it took to work this bill and get it to its final stage. I think we've passed out to you a list of over 150 organizations in the state of Washington that signed on to this bill in support. One of the things that you may not know about me is that I've been, career-wise, been quite an economic development person and worked for many years in private industry in economic development. And so coming to the state, while I chair education, I'm also very concerned about the economics of the state. We are the most significant import-export state. We rely on our agricultural sector significantly. And so when Trump first came into office and hearing about the state of Georgia losing its peach crop one year because they were complying and there was nobody to pick those peaches, and looking at our state, significant, we're known for our apples. We are #1 in pears as well, and a number of other crops that need to be handled, in person. What we were seeing was a destruction of our economy for no reason other than people were being picked up because they were people of color. And now we do see, without any due process, we're told people are illegals. We have no way of knowing that any one of them is illegal since there's been no due process proceedings. And so that was what happened with this bill. I was for 7 years on CERB, C-E-R-B, Community Economic Revitalization Board for the state of Washington, working with rural communities throughout the state. And I also was one of the founders of Partners for Rural Washington, part of Partners for Rural America. So I've worked heavily across the state, and I know that this bill is important in terms of keeping our businesses flourishing. When not a constituent of mine, but certainly someone I'm aware of, a senior executive at a major Washington corporation is picked up because he's jogging in his neighborhood while Indian, picked up by ICE, disappeared for 5 days, comes back and says, I'm not living in this country any longer, sold his house in Bellevue, and has moved back to his country of origin. We're seeing that. I don't know whether we're going to see, having sports in this state when so many. That may be my bag ringing. I'm sorry. Somebody take it out. I don't know whether we're going to see, a World Cup being played in this country. We are on lists of do not travel, many places around the world. And that is not good for our economy. That is another blow that we would have for our economy. So that's what this bill is about, is to making sure that if people are doing bad things, it is the responsibility of the federal government, who now just got how many billions of dollars more to do their job. Do your damn job and leave us the hell alone. Thank you.
That's right. That's right.
I thank Governor Ferguson for his leadership today. I want to thank my colleagues and the many stakeholders here that are behind me and in front of me for being here. I'm Representative Julio Cortez, an immigrant and Vice Chair of the Latino Democratic Caucus. And here in Washington State, we believe in building communities that are safe, welcoming, and strong. It's the Washington promise, as I see it. A promise that every person, no matter where they come from, can live, work, and contribute to our state without fear of being torn away from their family or targeted because of who they are. Our immigrant communities are at the heart of our economy and culture. They are the small business owners who keep our small communities thriving. They are the farm workers, just like my parents were and I was, who put food on our tables. They are the engineers, the teachers, the healthcare workers who power our state forward. Washington is stronger because of their hard work, their resilience, and their dreams. But we also know that federal action that we all hear about in the media, the raids, the deportations, and the policies that are designed to divide us, try to undermine that strength. And I want to be a little repetitive, like the governor said. I want to be clear that Washington State will not be bullied. We will not be intimidated. We will not allow fear to dictate the way we treat our neighbors. For example, the Keep Washington Working Act is our stand against those who want to use fear and intimidation to tear apart families and destabilize our communities. This law is about keeping local resources focused where they belong, on protecting public safety and not carrying out the work of federal immigration enforcement. It ensures that when a parent drives their kid to school, when a worker gets to their job site, or when someone calls 911 in an emergency, that help will come without fear that help will come with handcuffs and deportation. That is what real community safety looks like. It's about our values. Washington State is a state that looks forward, not backwards. It's a state where we invest in people, not walls, and it's a state where we lead with hope and not fear. So today I stand proud, not just as a legislator, but as an immigrant, as Vice Chair of the Latino Democratic Caucus here in Washington State, as someone who knows the true value that immigrant families bring to our beautiful state firsthand. And I want to say this to every immigrant in our state. You belong here. Your work matters, your families matter, and as long as we have a voice in Olympia, we will keep Washington working for you, for all of us, and for the true Washington we want to see moving forward, and nothing's going to stop us. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to acknowledge my colleagues here who are representing various organizations who stand with and walk alongside communities, immigrant communities in Washington State. I know we have Roxana with One America, Imran with Care Washington, Vanessa with WISN, and others that I'm missing, and many others who are not able to join us today. I'm also thinking about our client communities at Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, many of them who are undocumented. Many of them have lawful status, but are afraid that they will lose their status. And I want to say that today we are part of a network of organizations who stand with Governor Ferguson and Washington leaders in defense of Keep Washington Working. My name is Malu Chavez. I serve as the Executive Director of Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, an organization that has been directly serving the immigrant community across Washington State for over 40 years, seeking to defend and advance their rights. We are living in unprecedented times. The federal administration's goal of mass detention and mass deportation of immigrant communities, and again, not just undocumented communities, but many of our immigrant communities across Washington State and in the country. These goals are supported by a discretionary budget of more than $170 billion, and we are seeing changes in laws and the immigration policy and practices that we had not seen in close to 3 decades. We are witnessing the erosion of fundamental rights and protections through these changes in laws, policies, and judicial interpretations, which in turn weaken legal frameworks that safeguard individual freedoms, limit access to justice, and reduce protections against government overreach. Our communities are afraid of separation from their loved ones and their families, fearful of being apprehended, detained, and sometimes with the possibility that they will not be allowed to bond out, that they would be detained indefinitely, because these are some of the changes that the federal administration is enacting. And they're afraid that they will be ultimately deported to countries where many of them will suffer further torture or potential death. 2 weeks ago, the Tacoma Immigration Detention Center was at 1,560 capacity. a capacity of 1,575 total. These are our community members. These are our loved ones. And while they were shy of 15 people to reach the maximum capacity, many of them are giving up. They're deciding to self-deport. And they're afraid that they will not reunite with their loved ones or resuming their contributions to our communities. And these attacks are not just against our immigrant communities. These attacks are against all of us. It impacts all of us here in this room. Today is an important day for Washington State to stand together and reaffirm the importance of protecting its immigrant communities. We are doubling down. We have to double down on the importance of Keep Washington Working to continue to protect our communities. Keep Washington Working Act is one of the strongest laws in the country that protects immigrant communities. It does not violate federal law. To the contrary, it requires the federal government to respect the law, which means it can't force local and state governments to do the federal government's job or work that is not under their local jurisdictions. When our communities are under attack, it is more important now than ever to ensure that we protect our communities, including our immigrant communities, to defend against the federal government unlawfully overstepping. But it is also true that we need to work in partnership with our elected officials, with the governor, with our AG, with everyone here in this room and those watching, to improve protections and get ahead of further attacks and further harm, because we know that the federal government has those tools and has the resources to harm our communities further. And we need to do this for each and every one of our community members who are directly impacted, for their families and their loved ones, for their communities, but also for our future as a truly welcoming state. Thank you.
So I want to thank all of our speakers. And again, Malu, thank you for speaking in for the important work that your organization does and for the many, many organizations that are here. I'm sorry if we missed your name. We had a lot of folks come at the last minute, but just so appreciate all of you being here as well. Mayor Harrell, thank you for being here. I know the City of Seattle received a similar letter, and you did as well. So appreciate the partnership that we have on responding to this letter that Pam Bondi sent to each of us. So thank you for your being here and your leadership as well. And with that, we're happy to take some questions from folks here. Yeah, Chris.
Governor, you mentioned back in January that there was going to be this possibility of having a fight with the federal government. In fact, you've had conversations with the state treasurer about whether you could absorb a kind of loss of federal funding here. If that spigot gets turned off tomorrow as you fight this case, it sounds like, in the courts, are you prepared to pay the bills and keep the lights on here in Washington State?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Chris. So you're right. I've had many conversations with our state treasurer, Mike Plecciati, and many other folks here as well about our budget situation generally, but obviously specifically in regards to the federal government. And we've got many challenges with the federal government right now in terms of our budget. About 28% of the state budget comes from federal dollars, as we probably talked about before. Chris Reichtel, who I think I saw here as well, as an example of what we deal with, I think it was $137 million that a few months ago the federal government one day just said they were withholding from education. Thanks for scrambling to respond to that. And then not too long after that, they said, you know what, we're not going to take that money away. We're just responding in real time to these threats all the time. What I would say to answer your question with that background is, look, we have to navigate that. We're going to have to find a way to navigate the billions of dollars in cuts to Medicaid that have the potential to have 200 to 300,000 Washingtonians stripped away of health care coverage, for example. That's going to be difficult from a financial standpoint, but also we need to do that in a way, it's my feeling, and I think the folks here agree with me, that we also have to make sure we are, as a state, upholding our values as a state, right? That we have to be behaving in a way that is true to who we are. And, my letter back to Pam Bondi is pretty direct. And I was thoughtful about that, right? But when it comes to the Keep Washington Working Act, look, there's no compromise there, right? We're not going to change that law and weaken it in response to these threats. That's not going to happen for a lot of reasons. But a key reason is because we believe that is core to our values as a state in general, but especially now. And, my view is, at a time like this, it's time to lean into those values. I think, Malou, you said to double down, I think was maybe the phrase you used, if I remember correctly, like to double down on that rather than to walk away from them. So, look, I recognize that each of these individual decisions can be tricky, and there's a lot of factors. I'm certainly aware of that, as is everybody who's here today. But in terms of my approach, and I think the approach of the state, that's the way that I'm looking at it. Yeah.
The National Guard has been deployed in Los Angeles, Washington, D.C. That's another potential threat. And if this state's not going to do anything, are you and others, maybe Senator Wellman as well, concerned about them coming in and doing the job that this state's not doing, in their opinion?
Yeah, so a couple things. I mean, first, I just had a chance to talk to the Attorney General of the District of Columbia yesterday, by the way, about what's going on there. And, I forgot now how many states now have sent their National Guards in, but I know it's a growing number every day. Look, that is outrageous, right? And what's happening in the District of Columbia is outrageous. To your point about concerns we have about something similar happening here, of course. And I think you might have been there when leading up to the No Kings rally, for example, and after the National Guard was deployed over Governor Newsom's objections, right? Many of us worked together to try and do everything we can to avoid that from happening, to do everything we could to ensure the protests were peaceful, not to give any excuse for the National Guard, for President Trump to send the National Guard in. So we're certainly very mindful of that, Drew, to do everything we can to avoid that from happening. We're obviously working closely with the Office of the Attorney General on what legal options we would have in an event like that. And so we're prepared for that. We're preparing for it. But what's happening in the District of Columbia is outrageous, but we're prepared for that. Yes.
And certainly there's a lot of nuance I think both sides have failed to capture here. There's a lot of distance between, what Senator Wellman pointed out, the days where they stop someone because of their skin pigmentation and say, show me your papers. There's a big difference between that and the federal government pursuing people who are convicted child rapists, convicted drug traffickers, convicted murderers. So you've used this phrase repeatedly that we're not going to sacrifice our state's values. We have several instances in this state. I see the chief of the patrol behind you. He just sat front row at sentencing while a man was sent to prison, an illegal alien, who murdered a Washington State Patrol trooper because of our state's sanctuary policies. He could have been deported multiple times, run-ins with law enforcement, but our sanctuary policies shielded him. He went on to kill Trooper Christopher Gadd. How is that in line with our state's values?
Our job is to make sure we're adopting laws that make the appropriate balance. And the Keep Washington Working Act, adopted in a bipartisan fashion, by the way, by the state legislature, I think strikes that right balance. If folks violate the law, engage in criminal conduct, they're going to be held accountable for that here in Washington State, and whether you're documented or undocumented. So I think those are consistent with the values of the Keep Washington Working Act, and we'll continue doing that. Other questions? Yes. Yep.
Can you explain the case law that you're using in this particular case? Because there have been cases in the past where the federal government has threatened to withhold federal funding unless states conform with federal policy. Right. Thinking back to 1987, when it came to federal highway transportation dollars and changing of the drinking age, and states fell in line there. What case law are you citing here that you believe you can stand behind in a fight with the Attorney General?
Yeah, I think what I would say, I would turn that question around if that's okay, Chris, because keep in mind, it's Pam Bondi threatening us, okay? That's how this is starting. And look, as a lawyer, okay, when you get a letter like that, what is typical, if someone's threatening to file a lawsuit against you, what is common, what is just everyday lawyering, is you lay out your legal case, okay? You cite to cases, you provide your facts. None of that exists in this letter. It is all posturing. That's all it is. It's all threats. That's all it is. So, number one, my challenge is to her. What is this based on? Number two, I'm not going to prejudge potential litigation for obvious reasons, right? But what I will say is, having spent some time as Attorney General and having been Attorney General when this act was adopted, and obviously being very, very familiar with it and working with the legislature as they were moving through how to craft it and what's the right balance, What I will say, speaking for myself, is that I am very confident that if the federal government files a lawsuit challenging the Keep Washington Working Act, that we will be successful in defending it. We'll see what they choose to do. But I'm not going to, I hope you understand, won't get into the legal side of it now for obvious reasons. But my response letter does essentially challenge her. It does call out the fact that she cites to nothing other than some criminal statutes as part of her threat. So we're confident we will successfully be able to defend it. And that doesn't due large part to the many legislators who are here and others as well. Like, there was a lot of thought that went into the Keep Washington Working Act, trying to find the right balance in how we articulate that. A lot of thought went into that because we knew a day may come when there'd be a legal challenge to it. So we think it strikes the right balance, and I'm confident we can defend it. Any other questions? Let me go to someone that hasn't quite, if that's okay. Yeah, go for it.
Are you expecting the next step now to be sued over this?
I'll just repeat the questions, folks, again. Am I expecting the next step to be a lawsuit challenging? I don't know what to expect with the federal government today, tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow. I really don't. I don't mean that to avoid your question. I just, and what I believe, or the way I try to approach how things are currently with this administration, is to be prepared, right? That's where we can do our best work. As a cabinet, many of my cabinet members are here, right? As legislators, as organizations, all of us, right? Working together to be prepared as best as we possibly can. And by the way, that goes back to when the Keep Washington Working Act was adopted. I won't repeat, but a lot of that preparation went back into how we crafted that law, how the legislature crafted that law back in 2019. So I don't know what the next step is. But if they do choose to file a lawsuit, obviously we feel very prepared for it. But look, I would not have expected, as a governor of the state, to receive a letter from the U.S. Attorney General threatening to criminally prosecute me and other state officials over the Keep Washington Working Act. That was not something I had on my bingo card when I got elected, that's for sure. Yeah. Yes? Yeah.
The federal government and watching, there's possibly billions of dollars that we could lose from federal. Like, what should the people of the state expect or feel? Because it seems like not knowing what to expect in the very near future is a scary possibility. So what should we tell the people that watch us when there's billions of dollars on the line here?
Yeah. So what I would say is we have so far through these first, 8 months of administration, every time there is some threat to withhold a grant, for example, large or small, withhold funding to education, right? We are on that, okay? I can assure you, my day starts with an 8 a.m. phone call every day. Most days there is some discussion of what's happening at the federal level that could impact our budget, okay? And we go to work right away on that. All these folks here and many others work very hard to make sure we're preserving those federal dollars while not compromising our values. So in answering that question, I can't predict whether they're going to file a lawsuit against us or not. That's up to them. I can't speak to that. What I can say is that we're doing everything we can to work together to make sure we're protecting our resources as a state without compromising our values. And many, many folks in state government and with organizations are working hard to do exactly that. So that is a big focus of us right now and what we're doing. So, I think we feel very prepared for what's coming. The AG's office has been very, very helpful. We loop them in, obviously, when these situations come up to make sure that we're following the law in an appropriate way. So there's a lot of work that goes into it. So that's what I would say to the people of the state of Washington. If you pick up the paper, you see something going on that outrages you about the federal government, sorry, I'm just going to, if you have any question, yeah.
Including Oregon and California.
Yeah.
Have you been in touch with those governors at all? And could you talk about those discussions? Is there a chance of kind of a de facto coalition being formed?
So I've not had a chance yet to, the letter I think I just saw for the first time on Friday, just to be clear. And so I've not had a chance yet to speak to the governors of Oregon or California, but I'm confident that those conversations will take place. Typically what happens on something like this, just to give you a sense, is I think on the question on the National Guard that was asked, for example, hey, my team would be having conversations, of course, with California, right, team about how they dealt with the National Guard situation. So that'd be very common that the teams would be in communication, and if appropriate, I'd be having a direct conversation, with the governor as well. So haven't had that, just, I'm sure they will happen, but just we've been focused on our response and getting folks together, but I'm sure those conversations will happen. Yeah. Has anyone not had a chance to ask a question? Who wants to before I go back for a couple more? Great, let's do a couple more.
I have a follow-up, and I also have a question for Senator Wellman if she's taking questions, but a follow-up to the question I asked earlier, and you made the point, if somebody breaks the law, it doesn't matter if they're here illegally or they're citizens, we're going to arrest them, as was the case with the man who killed Trooper Gadd. But the point in the question was, he had had several run-ins with law enforcement in the years that he was living here illegally, where in a non-sanctuary state, they could have cooperated with ICE to remove him from the country. There's no doubt that Christopher Gadd would be alive today if it weren't for our state sanctuary policies. We also had the convicted child rapist who was just released from prison in Spokane out onto the streets, so ICE had to go track him down in the community rather than having an orderly and more safe transfer. So no one's saying, let's go round up people in the fields or whatever it is, but why not cooperate with the federal government and with ICE when it comes to known violent criminals who we could remove from our streets in the interest of public safety?
Yeah, appreciate it. I think I've answered that question. Any other questions that folks have? If not, last question. Yeah, go for it.
We're just getting word from some other states. Governor Newsom has a very similar letter to yours. Are you concerned, though, that some states or cities may not take this approach and do change and bend that knee that you're speaking about? Does that concern you, that not everyone's going to take the approach that Washington and California are taking?
That's a good question. I guess I've been pretty focused on our response here in Washington State, and I try not to, with other elected officials, whether other governors or elected officials in general, I try to give a lot of grace for folks who have difficult decisions to make, right? There's a lot of things to balance. And so I don't think, Drew, I'd want to, necessarily be critical of someone else on decisions they make or things they have to balance out. All I can speak for is, as a governor of Washington State, is what I think is the right thing for this state, right? That's, I think, what I need to focus on. And everyone's got to make their own decisions. I thought pretty carefully about the letter I wrote. I spent a lot of time on it. Went through every word pretty carefully, multiple times. I realize what I'm expressing back to Pam Bondi is pretty direct. But I just felt what she was writing to me was pretty direct as well. And it required a response that was not some legalistic thing, it wasn't that. This was some other level. And I'm just going to repeat this again. The idea that the Attorney General of the United States sends a letter to a governor, to a mayor, right? I think it's the same letter, I think. It's right, that you got it. Same letter. Right, exactly. Right, exactly. It's what us lawyers would call a boilerplate letter. You're substituting out, right? But all laughing aside, truly, right, the idea that a U.S. Attorney General would write a letter like that, citing federal criminal laws and threatening criminal prosecution, that's a whole nother level. Maybe just last thing I just will say is that, I remember in 2017, so my year as Attorney General, Donald Trump was first president, and it was early that year, and we were, the AG's office, of course, was very involved in taking on the president. And I remember I picked up my daughter from school. She was probably 8 years old at the time, and we were walking home from school together. And she must have heard something at school that day that, her dad might get in trouble for, challenging the president. Right? She was 8. You can understand why a kid might think that, right? That, hey, can you do that? And might you get in trouble? And she asked me about that on the walk home. It was something like, hey, are you going to be in trouble for doing whatever it is you're doing? I remember saying to her, I said, Katie, look, we're lucky to live in a country, right, where your dad or any American, right, can speak out against the president. But your dad can file lawsuits against the president, say things that are pretty direct about that president, be critical, stop him from doing something illegal, and I don't get in trouble, right? That we're lucky we live in a country like that, and not to take that for granted, because not every country is that way. That there are plenty of countries where if your dad did that, you'd be going to jail. I'd be going to jail, right? And the idea that now I need to have that conversation with my daughter, okay, and explain, well, maybe I'm not so sure about that. Now we are a country, a U.S. Attorney General threatens her father and other state officials with exactly that, going to jail. For what? For what? So look, I try to be careful with my words. You know, I really do, but we just really got to be honest with what's going on in our country right now. You know, we really do. And this is just taking things to an entirely another level. But what I appreciate is the support we have from so many all across our state. For folks who on very, very short notice are dropping what they're doing, being here today, the many other folks who couldn't drop everything today because they're busy with their things, who support our work, and we're not backing down, we're not compromising, we're not going to be bullied, we're not going to be intimidated. We have a lot of challenges ahead of us, but working together, I feel optimistic we will get through them. It's going to be a challenging time, but we're going to get through it. And I appreciate all of you so much for being here today and for all of you for joining today. Thanks so much, everybody. We appreciate it.